You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
All right, this is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and we have author R.W.W. Greene. Rob, welcome to the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ken. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's really nice to reaching you from the coast of Oregon over to New Hampshire. New Hampshire, I think it was more properly pronounced by me.
Yep.
So
to think.
great to connect with you. I just want to kick it off and mention I've read Mercury Rising, and just I want to tell you. I want you to tell listeners about the book a bit, because. But first, I wanted to mention just for myself, I was what I love so much about it when first listening to it is because I was really trying to situate myself in what era it was, and with an alt history, and a marvelous drop into thinking about speculative history and in politics in the 70s. I found it so fun and connected to my kind of like DNA of sci-fi that I've read heavily in the 70s and 80s. So it was a nice drop in, but like a really fresh, just like where am I for quite some time. Really, really deeply enjoyed the novel and its unique characteristics and where it takes you. But where did it come from, Rob? And tell us a bit about Mercury Rising.
The book kind of had its start right after the NASA space shuttle program got canceled. I was kind of irritated by that, so I wrote a short story called Gus Grissom and the Mercury Men, where I gave the Apollo 1 astronauts, Grissom, Chaffee, and White, they all died on the launch pad. I gave them a more dramatic ending, and that was basically the first chapter of Mercury Rising, that whole space battle that happened. Originally, that was Gus Grissom and Chaffee and White, fighting us with their friends, the communists, Yuri Gagarin, and all those guys. So that's kind of where it started, and I just kind of like the idea of the kind of the retro future Buck Rogers 1960s kind of thing. And then I started thinking about using 8 tracks as computer storage and disco, and just decided that I wanted to keep going in that world. And so I wrote an alt history where Robert Oppenheimer came up with an atomic space engine. Right after he came up with a bomb, we were able to get to the moon in 1950, and get to Mars not too far after that, and then the aliens showed up. So that was kind of the basic idea of the book. When I first came up with the idea for the series, I had an idea of 5 books, one for every decade between 1970 and current day 2020, where I was going to try to explore the tropes of the science fiction popular at the time. So each book would have kind of a different kind of thing. Like the 1980s would be very cyberpunk and that kind of thing. My agent kind of talked me down to 3 books, and then because of sales and that kind of stuff, the 3 books turned into 2. So the next book in the series, Earth Retrograde, the final book in the series, Earth Retrograde, is coming out in October of this year.
Yeah, I saw that October 24th, and
Yep.
I was excited to see that, and I also think sometimes I like to follow series. There's something about that nice fall release. I don't know, October, November that I noticed that, and really excited to hear about that, and the tantalizing idea that you put forth of digging deep into the tropes of the time. But
Yeah.
I just found, I don't know, the word playfulness with it, where it was so, it was fun. It was fun to be in the book. It was fun to have dialogue and to be in that kind of wild world. So everybody, yeah, Earth retrograde, October 24th, 2023. Right now, you can listen or read to Mercury Rising, a real blast. So you've done different things, Rob. I had read about the high school teacher. You've done freelance. You've done print journalism, and so one of the things I ask is, when did you see yourself as an artist?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I would see myself as an artist even now. I think I'm a pretty good writer, but I think I'm a craftsman rather than an artist. I kind of see myself as someone who can build a pretty good chair, and the chair holds you and is comfortable. And as a craft, I guess the craft sometimes can transcend to art. Maybe I'll make a super duper beautiful museum caliber chair at some point in time, but I think for the most part, I make good, comfortable chairs. Um, I was thinking about this question. I also teach college on the side, and I was having a conversation with one of my students because we decided to do a deep dive into Pink Floyd's The Wall this
Yeah.
semester. I get to pick the theme. So we were talking about, what makes art? Is art something that has to provoke? Is art something that, comes from inspiration? And, if so, if it's inspiration or intent to provoke, then, what comes next is you have to have the skills to pull it off, right? So everybody has, I've got this idea for a book, or I've got this idea for a thing, but if they don't have the skills to pull it off, it never quite makes it, never quite makes it out. But then again, if you've got the skills but you don't have the idea, what does that make you? Does that make you artless? So I have this conversation with myself and with my students fairly often. It's like, so what is the difference between art and craft? And there's a well-crafted sentence, and a well-crafted sentence can become art in the right light, I guess, with the right response. And there's also the idea is that once you create something, it's kind of like a bowling ball. You send it off down the lane, and you've got no control over what happens to it, no matter how many body movements you make. You try to get it out of the gutter or whatever. So, who's to say that as it kind of goes down the lane that it's not perceived as art, but, maybe it was just intended as a story, so.
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, you really helped me so much. There's something about the body movements of that ball that you'll never control, that you know for sure where it's going, but it doesn't go exactly there.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking too, when you mentioned, working with the student on the wall, and Pink Floyd's The Wall, and that always had great resonance on the themes of art, right? Of censorship, or like what education systems do, and the transgressive part of the artist, and calling out things about society. So definitely vibe with that really well. So what I wanted to ask, Rob, on that, talking art and craft, you're a writer, and I would look at your Mercury Rising as as a difficult achievement that you reached of embodying a very a different time, as far as maybe like tone and feel, and doing that fresh, like as a, what I would view as a piece of art. But going back into it with arts and craft, Rob, what's art? What do you think art is?
That's it's kind of like when they were debating obscenity in Congress. It's like they didn't know what obscenity was, but they knew it when it got them hard. I think art may be the same kind of thing. You don't know what art is, but when you see it and it stops you and it makes you think and it arrests you. I think, or not in a criminal term, but you just see it. It's an arresting image, an arresting story, an arresting piece of music. I think it's there's a way back in my high school teaching days, we always talked about poetry, and I was always trying to get the kids to kind of define poetry. And there was a quote we used to look at was that poetry is man's attempt to explore his own amazement. So it's like there's this moment of like I'm trying to capture this amazement, this feeling I have, and make it into a common experience. So I'm trying to take this thing, and I'm trying to use this kind of metaphor, this data compression on this piece of paper or in this image or with this song that's going to bring out the same emotions in you as they brought out in me. And I think if that can happen, then that is art. If I'm causing you to have a reaction, the same kind of reaction, emotional reaction that I had that inspired the piece, I think that's art. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, sure does. I like the part too. It comes up once in a while when I talk with folks of like the know it when you see it. And the part about amazement really captured me with what you said, right? Because that maybe it's amazement or awe or I don't understand it all, but
hmm
ooh,
And amazement
what a
doesn't have to
piece.
mean it's good. Amazement just means it could be just that WTF moment. It's like, what the hell is going on here? That's amazement is not necessarily a good thing. It's just I like your awe, because you also can be struck with awe, and it's not always a great thing to be struck with awe. The bombing of Baghdad, all those lights and stuff like that, the shock and awe kind of thing. It wasn't a great
Right.
thing that they were trying to awe people. They were just trying to cause them to cower in fear at the power of the experience, I guess.
Yeah, there's that nuance. I know of like some of the root of the word adore contains elements of fear, not only of adoration towards, but there's a power dynamic as well, which I think it's really interesting to look at words like that. And I've done a lot of poetry recently on the show, and I feel about poetry that way. It's like I always stumble when I try to explain it, but it's like how do people capture the true depth of of an emotion or a feeling in this crystallized form somehow, like
Yeah.
just looking at it, how did they get all that there? And I really enjoy that part of it. For you, Rob, just asking about the role of art itself. I think looking at science fiction and looking at things of temperature and climate in your books, Mercury Rising, you know, Earth retrograde. Just wondering about the science and the dealing with the times and the role of art. Do you see what you're doing here as um, having a particular intent? Um,
Hmm.
what is the role of art?
In science fiction, in particularly, or because science fiction has its own kind of thing where it's supposed to be trying to, show us where we're going and say, look, this is how it might turn out, and maybe we should do something different. One
Yeah,
of my favorite movies is Sowing the Green with Charlton Heston.
sure.
1970. Talking about climate change and talking about overpopulation, and of course, it brings it to the zenith of Soylent Green is spoilers. Soylent Green is people. Um, but it is that kind of thing that's it's trying to sound the Jeremiah and say, look, this is where we're going, and maybe we shouldn't go there. And I think science fiction in particular, that's one of its purposes, is to like look ahead and kind of like, maybe think about this. Sure, we can create an AI, but should we create an AI? Maybe we can create, you know, uh, colonies on Mars, but is that a good idea? So that's where the science fiction
Resource
kind of,
question. Yeah, like on the
yeah,
resource question.
yeah, that's where the science fiction kind of comes into it. Um, but every piece of writing, every story is, I don't know. Humans are very interesting in that we love story. We always create story. If we don't get a text message quick enough from our spouse, we send her a message, and we don't get a message quick enough, we rush to the idea of that something terrible has happened. We fill in the blanks. She didn't respond, which means that there was a car accident or something happened. So we try to fill in and answer those questions with story, and so the storyteller, kind of the filmmaker, writer, whatever, is kind of like filling in that gap, that need for story, with something that maybe doesn't have a message. I mean, every story has a message, and every story is, in its own way, is political. But they're trying to like fill in that need for story with something that amazes, that awes, I guess, that entertains while still, giving some kind of like direction, and letting you know what the author thinks about. There's a book, because I teach writing, and there's a book called Everything's an Argument, and the idea being that kind of every statement you make, everything you write, is some kind of argument. If I write the sky is blue, I'm trying to convince you that the sky is blue. If I'm writing you a book called Mercury Rising, I'm trying to convince you that you should read this book, and that the characters are interesting, and that the world is interesting, and every sentence I put in that book is trying to convince you, the reader, of that. um, so anybody who says that science fiction is not political, science fiction is not this, they're totally wrong. The very fact that in Star Trek the phasers have a stun setting tells you so much about the world of Star Trek, and that they start with trying to stun you first, and if that doesn't work, then they'll go up. But they're talking about the importance of life, with that stun setting. And it's kind of an amazing thing when you think about it, which I do probably too
Yeah.
much.
No, no. Thank you for mentioning that. I I hadn't really placed that idea within the context of that. Well, thank you. Just thinking about the first step of not destroying, right? Of trying to preserve on some basic level. What about the world of with what you'd like to say about Earth retrograde? So it's you talking about the ideas that you had in your head about where the book the place it inhabits. What about Earth retrograde? Just in general, where does that find the where will that find the reader? What kind of place?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote this kind of series and started in the 70s, I feel like the 70s, and I'm a child of the 70s, but I feel like the 70s is a time where we started to get things right. We had, the environmental movement, we had the truth and justice movement, we had a lot of civil rights stuff going on, we had a lot of gay rights stuff going on. So, granted, we had Nixon, but we also had a lot of like good stuff, like good social justice stuff happening. And then the 80s happened, and Reagan happened, and all that kind of stuff. But even Nixon had a universal income program. Nixon had a universal health care program that he was going
OSHA,
to, yeah, that he was good.
OSHA.
OSHA, yeah, or, all that stuff was happening. That was shut down by the conservatives in Congress at that time because they thought it was too communist. So the 70s were a time where I thought we really kind of started to get it right. Um, and by eliminating things in the book world, like Vietnam didn't happen because the Cold War didn't happen because we and the Russians were friends, because we and the Russians got together to defend the earth, right? Which is strangely enough another Reagan idea, because Reagan asked Gorbachev at one point in time during a meeting they had, like, Mr. Gorbachev, if we were invaded, would you come to our rescue? And they had that conversation about, like, if an alien actually came to Earth, would the Russians come and help us out, and we would help the Russians out, which was an actually conversation that Reagan had. Um, so the idea, and then Mercury Rising, or Earth retrograde, takes place in the late '90s. Which was up to, is that's when the kind of the story comes to an end, and Y2K is going on, and all the things, but it's a 90s that was changed by having the aliens come. So it's not the 90s we knew. It's not your Clinton 90s. It's a 90s where you know we've been kicked off the planet. It's because of the original owners of the planet have come back and said, guys, it's time for you to leave. We've got this other place to go. So it's not the 90s you know of, but hopefully it'll at least rhyme a little bit with the 90s that we remember.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's such really excited to hear about that. And we're recording here in April going into May, and no, really excited to pick up that story. I think hearing about your approach, and I think actually it was really refreshing to hear components of your analysis of the 70s, just like generally politically. I was born in 72, so I have this kind of like ghostly carryover from what I know about my young parents, in the 70s into the 80s. But, I've even written, and I talked to my kids about like just how messed up it was. Like when I grew up in the 80s, like I always thought like the world was going to blow up like a nuclear like holocaust. And I'm like, you kind of like giggle or be horrified by that or whatever your reaction was. But I just remember thinking about that one day. I'm like, man, that's kind of wrong to hoist upon like a culture and a society, like this kind of constant,
well, we're doing it
threat
now.
of annihilation.
The kids all are completely aware that the climate is screwed, right? And they know it's
Yep.
screwed.
Yep.
And I think that's why we see so many kids who are anxious and depressed and all this kind of stuff now. The pandemic was, an apocalypse in its own way. Apocalypse is really something, it's not something that ends everything. It's just something after which nothing is ever the same. So I think that whole pandemic thing was kind of a bellwether to what, our children and our grandchildren are going to face, down the pike. And I think the kids are very aware of that. And I had a student in college classes this semester who is literally very angry every day, that we, his forebears, their earlier generations, have made things so impossible for the Gen Z and the Gen Y and the Gen after that. And I can't really blame them. They're the first couple of generations that are not going to do as well as their parents did. They can't afford a house, they can't afford any of this kind of thing. So while we were, you and I, because I was born in 71, so I had the same kind of experience with, the Reagan era, and like we were going to get blown up at any point in time. And,
Yeah.
we've outlawed the Soviet Union. We began bombing in 5 minutes. We've got all that stuff in our
Yeah.
heads, the Iran Contra, all that kind of stuff. So even while we had that, at least in the 90s, we had that like moment of like we could breathe for a little while before it got crazy again. I don't know that the kids today, the younger generation, are going to have that. So I don't know where
Well,
I'm
I
going with
think,
that
and
necessarily.
what I see too is one of the things, like even on like the labor question, because I work in the labor movement, and this is by far the most pro union gender. They don't accept a lot of the bullshit that maybe I don't know, we or others have accepted about it. They're like, no, work shouldn't be like that. Like I
Yeah.
reject that idea. Like I don't want to live like that. And it's like kind of like for me, I'm like, yeah, damn. Like there's a difference. There's a
Yeah.
difference. And one of the things I think I talk about too is there's a lazy use of like the power of being older, of having like false and ignorant kind of assumptions about things. And I find that even with labor, where sometimes veterans will be like, oh, they don't know anything about labor, they don't know. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
You can statistically show that they're saying no to stuff that other people put up with, and they're saying in more pro union, more. I'm not
Yep.
saying it's all wonderful, and but I'm saying the organizing climate for a group in an age of workers who just reject the nonsense that we in some way have accepted is very good for resistance, or at least a labor movement, or or the environmental movement is saying, nah, all that stuff's bullshit, or a bunch of that is. We got to do it different. So I find it
Yeah.
inspiring, you know?
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm a union guy myself. Teachers union and blue collar union, depending on what job I've had. And it is nice to see that. I mean, the pandemic taught us a lot about what's important. Is it important to to value yourself? Is it important to take care of what you need? Is it important to be creative? And the I think the kids have said a resounding yes. It is important to do this stuff, and and if they can figure out a way to do it in a 4-day week, awesome. If they can figure out a way to do it, working from home, fantastic. I think um, I think the kids are all right. That's kind
Yeah.
of my where I'm from is the kids. The kids are you and I are Gen X and that kind of weird little generation of ours. But I think I wish these kids today had the world that we had back in when they could have still made a kind of a climate change turnaround kind of thing. I
Yeah.
wish we had been but we didn't have the internet and we didn't have all this kind of stuff. I wish we had been as savvy as they are, but we were not. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great discussion. And, I think in looking at, at your works and, thinking about alt history, I've had, some other science fiction authors like B.L. Blanchard and Sasha Stronach,
Hmm.
and just like I find it so invigorating to take a look at really kind of jagged, deep problems and just
Hmm.
play with like where you place them and can interact with them because I find it's spurring to the mind. Like
Hmm.
science fiction's always been spurring to my speculative mind and aim towards problem solving or just fun as well,
Hmm.
but you can solve problems in a fun way too. So um really dig on that. I'm gonna jump to another uh big question, Rob. And it's the title of the show, and I wanted to just have you take a crack at it right now, talking about uh why is there something rather than nothing. And I would just say that folks have um, had a go at this one from science, philosophy, or absurdism, or whatever angle you want to take at it.
I was thinking about that because like I said, I've listened to a couple of your shows, 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 6 of your shows in kind of preparation for that. And it's why is there something rather than nothing? And what kind of there's the obvious kind of like nature abhors a vacuum, and every time there's a space that it gets filled by something. So, but then again, if you don't have nature abhorring the vacuum, then that's nothing. In which case, why is there nature? I'm a secular humanist. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God and that kind of thing. And you look back at the physics of the Big Bang, and the whole idea is that everything was compressed to the point of a singularity until it exploded. Um, the pressure of that. Um, and then you think about what I was saying earlier about how the human mind needs story, so it comes up with these terrible scenarios in the absence of information. I haven't heard from my son all day. He must have broken his leg and been hit by a car, and he must be in the hospital in a coma and things like that. We're creating that story that doesn't exist. Um, and it may be that if there is a central truth to the universe, maybe it's that it's creation. And I don't mean creation with a capital C, a directed creation. I think that you know we tend to go from a point of potential to actuality every single time. If there is the potential, then it becomes the actual. It's always kind of like the force, the energy is always running downhill. And then it pools, and then once it gets to a point where it reaches capacity, it runs downhill again. And I think that's probably why there's always something rather than nothing, because it may start small, but once it achieves a point where potential energy cannot be held by whatever is holding it back, then it becomes something. um you know that's kind of my thought on the, because it's a very interesting question. It's a, why is there, why are you making a podcast? You could have not made a podcast, but you chose to make a podcast because you wanted to put an idea out into the world, either because you're looking for an answer or because you want to generate the conversation. So you chose to make something rather than leave it as nothing. It's just like some of it's about, wanting to leave a mark on the world. And some of it, I think, is just, that's just what we are. Why do we make TV shows? Why do we go out to our backyard and build a patio where there's just grass? Why? Because we have the capacity to. I don't know. Maybe that's my
No,
thought.
I
That's my
really,
answer.
no, I really enjoyed so much that, and I think and one of the pieces was thinking about actuality and potentiality. It's like a lot of ways we to look at things or talk about things philosophically, like being and becoming, and yeah, there's this creative drive, behind it all. And when you were describing kind of like how things kind of like compile and composite and reach a point where they need to surge forth,
Mm.
I really connect with that because I just did a recent episode with somebody who's a botanist, right? And just like it's this that seed's gonna pop out, that sun's gonna hit at that point, and there's something simple, I think, in powerful connected to that. I wanted to ask you, Rob, just a bit. I've I've taught at the university level for a short time, quite some time ago, and one of the things I get interested in is creators like yourself, thinkers like yourself, teaching and connecting with creativity and art. What's that experience like for you in trying to help creators and thinkers develop?
Well, one of the interesting things about college education now is that it's become very, very transactional. Where once upon a time, you went to college in order to get well-rounded, to kind of become enlightened, to get smart, to like, you get to liberal arts education and things like that. And now you're not seeing that as much. Like the college that I teach at, the biggest or most popular major is business, because they want to get the degree in order to get the job. So if they could just, I think if they just could just pay for the diploma, they wouldn't have bothered with the whole college experience. Most of the kids, like if they could like fork out $100,000 and get the diploma, and just go from there, I think they'd be
They
fine
have
with
their
it.
receipt. They have
Yeah,
their
they've got the
receipt.
receipt, so that it's a very transactional kind of thing. So I teach college composition, where I teach them how to write, in various forms, different kinds of essays, and I teach sophomore seminar, which is a research-based class where I pick the theme. Um, and that's one of the reasons why I picked The Wall this time, Pink Floyd's The Wall, because you look at music in terms of like the way music has evolved from the chamber music to the madrigals to the finally they're getting the Victrola that they could wind up and like actual have music in the home and really democratize music and everybody could have music
Yeah.
to, but you only had like one song on that record, and then the LP, which allowed more music. Then, one of the first things they started doing when they had the long play record is they started putting musical theater on it. So musical theater came to the home and everybody could listen to Hello Dolly or whatever it is. So you didn't have to go to
Yeah.
Broadway anymore to do it, which democratized it more. And then, the concept album kind of came in where, like people like Rosemary Clooney were doing like, I'm going to do a record of love songs. And, that was the first time you could have like a whole theme album of love songs or Christmas songs or whatever. And then
Yeah.
you've got, the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper and the theme-based concept album. Then you've got like the narrative kind of album, like The Wall or Tommy or things like that. And then from there, you've got the CD, and the CD was able to do 15 songs on it. So you got even more songs. And then nowadays, you've got the streaming where, and I've done polls on this with my students, it's very rare that they buy the whole album anymore because they just stream the one song they like. So if you can imagine like listening to The Wall nowadays, you'd only hear three songs,
Right.
right? You'd only hear,
Yeah.
Wish You Were Here, Comfortably Numb, and Brick in the Wall, right? You'd only hear those three
Yeah.
songs. You wouldn't hear the entire thing. So we talked a lot about that. And, we started listening to like some of the music, like Lord's Pure Heroine is a concept album, but they had never
Love that
listened to any
album.
song but they hadn't heard any song other than Royals. So when they actually listened to the entire album, they realized how self-referential it is and how it talks to, everything talks to itself. And, we looked at Frank Ocean stuff, and we looked at, My Chemical Romance, My Beautiful Dark, all those kind of things. So
Yeah.
we listened to a lot of records, and I think one of the things I was able to do was make them aware that, these albums are put together in a way to make that you want to listen to the entire thing. Except maybe not so much anymore because musicians are realizing that everybody is Spotifying everything. So we did the research and found out that, like, lyrical complexity is just as complex as it ever has been, but the lyrical complexity of popular songs has gone down because the popular songs are the ones we can hear in 5 seconds and jam to them. So like anything
Yeah.
that becomes popular now is generally is more musically simple, has a more simple theme, and it just kind of catches our ear. um, we also talked about, because Beyonce's Lemonade, which came out a couple of years ago, and she made you listen to the entire album by putting a film out. So she put the film out with the musical background. So and
Yeah.
she
Damn.
released
Yeah.
it
Of course.
first, right? So you
Yeah.
had to listen to the entire thing because she's Beyonce and she can force you to do stuff like that. Um, so just that was one of the interesting things about talking about like how music has changed. And you've got a couple of the kids who are like they're going back to vinyl, and they actually have like listening parties and that kind of stuff. But it's most of them are like they it's just they listen to the one song, or they have the the algorithm refer them songs like the song they listen to, which maybe helps them discover new music, but it doesn't help them get the entire picture of the record.
Yeah, it's such a different thing, I think, in thinking about listening. But I tell you, I talked about this once. I had this really cool listening experience because my child Aiden is very much into a wide array of music, but one particular kind of time frame was maybe like popular metal, like aspects of new metal and post metal and stuff, and just stuff I hadn't like I maybe heard in the background, but I was just listening. My listening habits were so different that
Mhm.
there was a kind of a space of music where I would have expected to encounter it, never really did, but then was able to rediscover it with them and
Mhm.
listening to it. And it was strange to be like going back 20 years and learning through my child who's listening to the albums really into each release, and I was like,
Mhm.
it's kind of a unique experience to be taught in that type of way, and I knew it at the time as well.
Yeah, I got a buddy of mine. He's 80 and he was a high school teacher most of his life. And he says, it's time to stop being a teacher when you don't recognize the kids' music anymore. Because you're not,
Yeah,
that you're not with
little
it.
rule of thumb.
You're not in there with them. Um, and I think it's kind of. I mean, I love music. I'm a music person. I listen to all kinds of music. I am actually a fan of Taylor Swift. As well.
I'm a huge. This show is a huge Swifty,
Yeah,
show. We had the animation director for Miss Americana, Elise Kelly, on.
that's cool.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I had this conversation with my a couple students, and we have this idea that she is the new Springsteen. She is the kind of the new boss
I
of the
like
current
that.
set, and because she can do anything, and
Yeah,
she may not be the best singer, but lyrically she's fantastic. She reinvents herself. She and as another young person I was talking to says, if you don't like Taylor Swift, it's because she hasn't made your album yet. She will make your album, the album that makes you fall for her eventually, but maybe she just hasn't made it yet. Um, and
tantalizing idea. It's a
yeah,
tantalizing idea.
yeah, and I used to have a kid when I was teaching high school. He used to come and visit me every morning, and we talk about, he got me into Kendrick Lamar, and I really got into Kendrick Lamar, and he really started getting me into that kind of like lyric dense rap, that same kind of way. I'm still not a big EDM fan, no matter what the kids say, the students say. But they've certainly opened my eyes to new art. There was a young dude in one of my college classes who introduced me to Taco Core, and Taco Core. I don't know if you've heard about this, but
I
Taco Core.
haven't, but tell me.
Yeah, Taco Core was a book that was written right after, kind of in the early aughts, after 9/11 started, all the anti-Muslim furor started going on, and this guy wrote a book about this young Muslim man who moved into a house in which there was a um, uh, Islamic punk band. And so they were like playing punk music and drinking and having sex and all that kind of stuff, which is all very haram. And his mother was comfortable with him moving there because they had a prayer flag up and this kind of stuff. But he in as a result of this book, there was an entire brief Muslim Islam punk movement called Taco Core that happened with all these different bands, and there's this really big thing. And then now there's a schism between what is Taco Core and what is not Taco Core. But the whole idea of this, like this, is the Islamic punk, raging against the same thing that other punks were raging against, but also raging against the racism of America in post nine
Yeah,
eleven America,
yeah,
which is something I had never heard of this, and so of course I got the book and read the book, and I've been listening to music and this kind of stuff. I can't understand a lot of it because I have no Arabic, or any of the other languages they're singing in, but you can definitely feel the rage in the music, the energy in the music. And you've got people in the audience who are wearing hijab. You got people in the audience who are, they're punk, but some of them don't
yeah.
drink because it's haram, but some of them do. And it's just that really interesting youth movement, that I learned a lot about from this particular student, and I've gone on a deep dive on that since. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I might be near one on my own. That's how it happens. Part of the infectious aspect
Yeah,
of the
yeah, it's cool.
of
Taco
of,
Core,
of the
TAQ.
ideas.
Yeah, TAQWA, Taco Core, CORE.
Yeah, thanks so much. I earlier, a long time ago, I was really influenced. I was really lucky to come in contact with a lot of Washington D.C. Punk history through a very good friend of mine, Sean Brown, who was in the bands Swizz and Dag Nasty, and
Mm.
just learning just that power of punk. Like, it's not my like top style of music, but it always serves and always is something I drop into more and more, and just does it for me like other things don't. And so that's why when you're talking about, I mean, I love those stories, and it's because it's like resistance against crap, or resistance
Yeah.
against stupidity or something. Like
Yeah.
I'm down.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Yeah. No, totally. And it's not my
Hey,
favorite. I mean,
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I say it's not
No.
my favorite. Punk is not my favorite either, but it's something that I return to quite often. I listen to anything as long as it's good. But I mean, I think if I'm gonna die tomorrow, I'll probably listen to a lot of Miles Davis. But if I'm not gonna die tomorrow, then I'll branch out a little bit. Let's put it that way.
Hey, uh, Rob, I want folks to come in contact with your work. R.W.W. Greene here, sci-fi author. How folks run into your material, your books, your thoughts. You have there's a lot of a lot to share, and I'm certainly thinking like music, art, and all these things. But why don't you lead folks to finding more of your work?
Sure. I've got a website that's rwwgreen.com. That's kind of like information central, links to the books and this kind of thing. I'm on the dying social media site Twitter at R.W.W. I also Instagram at R.W.W. And I've got a Substack newsletter I put out every couple of weeks called 21st Century Blues. That I write about anything from I don't know, school shootings to music to whatever kind of comes out of my head in those 2 weeks. The books are in Barnes and Noble. They're in your local bookstore. They're on bookshop.org. They're published by Angry Robot, which is a science fiction press in the UK. So pretty much anywhere they speak English, you can find them or order them. So.
Oh, it's really great to chat with you. And hey, Rob, what about your you want to just drop a little bit about your own playing of music and your relationship with the guitar and stuff like that?
I'm a shitty acoustic player. I'm a bad acoustic player, but I play, and I don't play for anybody's enjoyment but my own and my cats, and sometimes my wife. If I could have picked something to be artistically gifted in, it might have been music, but unfortunately, it didn't work out.
It's well, it's great to chat about art and music and the power of music and poetry and in your writing. Really appreciate that. I tell you, the Substack format, I'm gonna check out your stuff some more. I've subscribed to Sharon Nova, who's been a guest on the show, and Hannah Walker Brown, and I've just come in contact with some really great Substack writing. So thanks for being there. I'm going to check that out. Everybody check out R.W.W. Greene Substack, and really great pleasure talking with you, and really just the stimulation about the ideas. I really would just want to thank you for the work of art you created, Mercury Rising, and I don't know, its own particular resonance for a dude like me reading it out here in Oregon in 2023. So great pleasure to meet you, Rob, and really thank you for coming on to Something Rather Than Nothing.
Yeah, same here. Really good conversation. If I ever see you in real life, I'll buy you a beer, a cup of coffee, whatever you want. We'll have another conversation.
Thanks so much, brother, and everybody. Make sure you check out R.W.W. Greene, Mercury Rising, and in the fall of 2023, Earth Retrograde. Have a great day, Rob.
All right, you too, man. Take care.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.